Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Sullivan. I'm the Communications and Policy Officer at the Jane Goodall Institute, and I am very, very pleased to introduce you to JGI's new Executive Director, Anna Rathmann. Hello, Anna. Well,
Hi, Ashley.
I'm so happy to speak with you. I feel like there's a lot we're going to get into. And I just love that we can dive into all things conservation and JGI and the stuff that we love.
Me too. I could talk about this stuff all day, every day. So yeah.
Let's do it. Marathon conversation begins now. Okay, so first of all, let's let the people know who you are. How did you get started in conservation? What's your story? How'd you get to JGI?
Yeah. Well, how did I get started in conservation? I will say I am the product of some really wonderful influences in my own life who always encouraged me to get outside, who encouraged me to remain curious. And so I've always been one of those kids. And I started off my very early in my career as a seasonal park ranger in Yellowstone National Park. And that was a really wonderful experience. I still have the hat. I've got the badge.
Should have been on for this conversation.
I should have been wearing it. I should have been wearing it to pay homage. Yeah, so I got, that was an amazing experience working at that level with the government and in such an iconic place in Yellowstone, the first national park, and then also being a representative of something much larger than myself, the national park system, because it was always funny. You'd put on the hat, you'd put on the uniform, and you got all kinds of questions. I mean, people would expect you to know everything about the park and everything in between. So that was really where I like to think that I got my start in conservation. I went on from there. I worked at National Geographic for many years, and that was a wonderful experience because National Geographic is the kind of place where it's making science and discoveries and exploration accessible to people. And so, telling science, not distilling science, not making it simplified, but making it accessible to audiences all over the world. And that storytelling, and that was really a wonderful, wonderful place to spend several years and got to meet some really interesting people. I worked with a lot of their explorers and their supporters, and so just had a wonderful time there. And that was where then I met some other folks who I would go and have the great honor of helping them set up a foundation that did work in Africa. So I focused on Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. It was what the Great Plains Foundation. We had a project that was relocating rhinos from areas of intense poaching and doing reintroductions into the wild and into former habitat of theirs. And so that also was a fantastic experience working with wildlife and learning all about the kinds of challenges facing wildlife that are under intense threats of poaching and wildlife trafficking. And then I now find myself here at the Jane Goodall Institute. So I know it's such an honor. It's such a privilege, truly, to come to work every day and work with individuals who are doing extraordinary things, whether they're in the fields or in other parts of the Institute. It's just a privilege. It's absolutely a privilege. Someone like you. So yeah, really.
Thank you. Exactly. We got to excite each other in our work together. You scooped my second question.
Oh.
And second of all, I can see the connective dots to what got you here. So second question, part two, because you started it. What excites you about being a JGI and in this role at JGI?
Yeah. JGI is amazing. First of all, let's just start with Jane. Jane is an amazing, amazing founder. As somebody who truly, the term trailblazer does not do it justice. So to have the opportunity to work at an organization that is supporting and fulfilling her mission and vision and keeping her legacy is just amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And then the work of JGI. So our field teams, extraordinary work that's being done. The teams that are working with youth through Roots and Shoots, it's just incredible. And to see the ripple effects that go out far beyond any border of any country. And it truly is a global organization. So it's a privilege to work with folks who are doing good work, who are making the world a better place. And yeah, how lucky are all of we to be here?
Pretty lucky. I have to reinforce that. And I think, again, you're making this conversation so easy because this is very close to the third question, which is, ideologically, you just brought up some of the great aspects of JGI, that it is so much of Jane's sort of ethos and philosophy put into practice. And so in that vein, conservation has definitely evolved. Science has evolved to include a lot more women and women's voices. You are a woman at the helm of JGI. How does that sort of speak to you? How do you see it evolving? Why do you think it's important? Just a simple question like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very complex question, but conservation and science, those fields are very complex. And the importance of having diversity and diversity of gender, of ethnicity, of perspectives, the importance of all of that is that you get a more holistic approach, and you are able to shine a light on other ways of doing things. And well, have you thought of this? Well, we used to do it this way. So you get that kind of dialogue, that it's a much richer dialogue than if you just have a bunch of folks talking to themselves. And in terms of the role of women in conservation, I think it's very important to have anyone who feels strongly about conservation to be involved, whether they're a woman or a man. I've been privileged to be in this industry my whole career, and I would encourage anyone who has an interest. And I often find myself in conversations with people, some of whom are looking for a second career. So they've had a successful career in one industry, and they're looking to pivot. And they'll contact me and try to understand what it means to work in conservation. And one of the things that I always come back to is it's this very dynamic industry. So it really can take all types from all different backgrounds. And whether you have a background in writing, whether you have a background in science, whether you have a background in finance or medicine or all of legal, all of these different industries really can benefit the conservation dialogue.
Yeah, I love that answer, because I think so many people, when we talk about inclusion, it is about accessibility and removing barriers and creating a level of equity and fairness, but it's also about the world we can live in when all of those voices are a part of things, just like you said. And those are two sides of the same coin, is that when people are included, look at what we can do. And I think it's so great that with someone like Jane and someone like yourself, it is tangible examples for people of how everyone from every identity can insert themselves into something that is so comprehensive and dynamic and complex as conservation, because we need it. We need the legal team, we need the finance team, as we know with One Health, we need a medical team, we need, zoonotic disease experts, we need everybody. So I really appreciate that perspective, because it's also a hopeful one, right? It's one that's like, envision this future where everyone's voices are included.
Absolutely, absolutely. And bringing time and talent as well. I think that's part of it. And all of these diverse backgrounds, and also coming back to Roots and Shoots, the perspective that young people can have and on an issue is always so exciting to me too. It's not, well, that's just the way it's done. Young people typically don't take that as, okay, well, then I'll just leave it,
Right.
So it's engaging across the spectrum of age as well, and bringing them into the dialogue as well.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited to have someone like you that feels that way and acts that way, and is taking the organization further in that direction. So What makes JGI special and unique in the world as it is today? Like, we're facing existential crises like climate change and biodiversity loss. What is it about JGI that kind of answers those threats?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. If I want to talk kind of conceptually, one of the things that JGI does so well, and you hear Jane herself talk about this so often, is instilling hope. And this idea that we are not, it's not all lost. And the ingenuity of humanity and working together, and that challenges are put forward so that they can be met. That kind of theory, or that sort of narrative, runs through JGI. And I think that's a very, I think it's unique. I think it's special. I think it's critical. Especially because so many, you mentioned it, these large crises that we are faced with, you can't let people become despondent. You can't let them think that there's nothing to be done. And so I'm just going to continue doing this destructive behavior because, what does it matter? What does my one action? No, it's turning it on its head of my one action matters. So I think that is very special about Jane's message, but also about JGI. The other thing about JGI that just first comes to mind is Gombe. And my goodness, that kind of research, that sort of longitudinal research of over 60 years in that site, it's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary to have that kind of continuity. I was just talking the other day with a group that studies early human development and what they're learning, and the value of Jane's research and subsequent researchers' work at Gombe in helping identify some of these questions that are surrounding early human species. So it's really, it's just extraordinary when we talk about Gombe. And then of course, Takare. Let's talk about Takare. That is one of these beautiful examples that you're starting to see many more of. I have to give the conservation industry credit, because really there has been this tide that has turned, that involving communities in conservation projects is really coming to the forefront in a way that it wasn't necessarily decades and generations prior. But that's something that JGI really has to be proud of, is that the Takare model and working with community-centered conservation and landscape-wide conservation is something that has been a part of JGI for years. And that's not something that's new to us. It's not us jumping on the bandwagon late. It's us being in the driver's seat that we've been doing this. So, that's very, very special. And then I could go back to roots and shoots, but
Please feel free. Let's talk about roots and shoots till the end of time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful. So there's so much about JGI that's very special within this kind of larger universe of the conservation industry and of the NGO universe. But it's also just putting in a context of why it matters in our world today. And that's where I come back to this idea of hope, and this idea of, when you think all is lost, it's not. There's a great quote, I think it's Thomas Edison, that he said, when you've exhausted all possibilities, remember you haven't.
Mm-hmm.
There's always something more. And that's,
yes. That's an excellent quote to lean on. I think I actually went to Edison's lab recently.
Oh, cool.
And I know that toward the end of his life, he was really experimenting with like forms of rubber. And
interesting.
To your quote exactly, because he basically just went until he could find the right option. And I think, there is this commitment, like you were saying, within the organization to the idea of hope, because we do feel that you have to continuously try and evolve and integrate as many thoughts and thinkers and people and communities to get to better solutions, better answers. And I think exactly what you said, I could not say better. That's what keeps me around for sure. So,
Right.
and once again, transitioning perfectly,
Oh.
my last question is about hope.
Hmm.
You spoke a lot about what makes you hopeful about JGI. Personally, is there anything about JGI, but also just sort of the work and movements in the world that make you hopeful in response to, some of the crises that we discussed earlier, but just sort of in general, is what kind of motivates you personally and makes you hopeful?
Yeah. What makes me hopeful is just that there's always an answer, there's always a solution. Things change, and so we need to be aware of that. But with creative thinking, and I'm a consummate optimist that there's a lot of hopeful people out there who just need a little bit of encouragement, and that it's a very easy thing, that hope can be contagious. And I think that's where, coming back to this model of community-led conservation, where you're involving the individuals who will ultimately benefit or not from the actions, and inviting them in. And what you start to see is this beautiful ripple effect where it works and it expands and it goes beyond, because that hope and that success becomes contagious and other people want to be a part of it. And that's, you see examples of that. Sometimes you have to look a little bit harder, but they're there. They're absolutely there. And that's what's part of the fun. It's finding those.
I love that notion that it is something that could be fun. Like, obviously, there's tragedies, there's crises, the threats are completely, growing and changing and evolving. But it's also, to your earlier point too, I love the idea of reframing it as, this is a challenge, but it's something that can be fun and it can be filled with hope if we all are able to collaborate on it, or even just, see what other ideas are out there. And that's so important because, reinforcing what Jane has said, reinforcing what you have said, that is what gets people to move forward in their daily lives, but also beyond that, to these larger issues that they can focus on locally and then together build out in this way that is contagious completely.
Exactly. I think there's also space. I loved what you were just saying about it being fun. I think there's always space for levity.
Yeah.
And and that you can find yourself, we've all been in circumstances in our lives where you find yourself in, it's like, wow, could things get worse? Oh, wait, they just did. you know, and
Yes.
and to be able to laugh and to find joy even in the chaos, and to be able to pull one another out of despair, really, and say, listen, we're gonna do something here, we're gonna keep going forward. And that's what's going to happen. And you can make it fun, and you can make it joyful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so much of what Jane has said and led as an example of is so much of her speaking and her talk. She does lead with that kind of jovial, fun attitude, because she knows that ultimately, life is short, and the things that we do to connect to one another is what is going to make a better world. And we have to bring that out in each other, even when things are, at their darkest.
Right.
And so I'm very glad to have you at JGI, because I think you're going to take us forward with all sorts of fun, even in the challenges that we face.
That's right. That's exactly right. And to your point about Jane's, there's always that saying of that people don't remember what you say, it's how you made them feel.
That's the Maya Angelou quote.
Yes, exactly. And so if people can walk away, even if you're talking about very large serious subjects, which many of the subjects that JGI is tackling are, but you can walk away with a sense of optimism and a sense of community, because here we are engaged in this together. That's what's going to ultimately carry you forward. So
yeah, and it's also what reinforces the sense that you've accomplished something, you know, even if it is just opening someone's mind, or, you know, changing someone's attitude slightly. Like that is, I think also some of what you've said has been about sort of the long-term investment in Gombe, the long-term investment in Takari, the roots and shoots. And I think it is a part of JGI's culture that we invest in the long game. And so, you know, small changes in attitudes, in understanding, in actions, in iterations of programs, that is what builds to, you know, a portfolio of change that means something, both at the individual level and hopefully in larger systems. So with that, I would just like to say, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with JGI or yourself, or your excitement with this role or anything?
Yeah, well, it is all, I'll come back to what I said earlier, which is it's such a privilege. I'm so inspired by all of the staff, by everyone in the JGI universe. It is, to be a part of this is just a joy. So I'm so happy to be a part of it. And I look forward to those brighter days ahead when we can get out of Zoom and we can get back together and meet in the field. You've got Gombe behind you, and won't that be fun?
It will absolutely be fun. And I am going to take that fun through the rest of my day. So thank you for that. And it has been an ultimate pleasure, and I can't wait to speak with you again. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you.